Thank you very much. This was basically a telehealth study, and it was a feasibility study which we conducted with HRC funding and in partnership with a number of other people. So Liz Broadbent, who was the principal investigator, was from the Department of Psychology at Auckland University, and Bruce McDonald from the Department of Engineering, and Nari Kurz, Population and Health. I guess the most important people in terms of the intervention were the physiotherapists who actually conducted the study, which is Nicola Jepson and Vicky Ogilvie. Doesn't see. So why COPD? Well, COPD is an important healthcare problem. You can see that in Middlemore Hospital we have more than 1,000 admissions a year with COPD, and it costs the DHB about $30-odd million a year in funding. And the readmission rates are high. There's about a 25% readmission rate at 30 days across Australasia. It's actually only 22% historically at Middlemore. And during the period of the study, and likely as a result of this intervention and more comprehensive management, we actually reduced the readmission rate down to 18%. I think there's the potential to do even better. Oops, that's the other way. So the robot, which we used, basically just sat on a table. It was about 30 centimeters high. It came from Korea, but importantly, it was programmed by the University of Auckland engineers to do what it was that we wished it to do. But it's got a number of features which I'll show you if you'd like to stay on at the end of this presentation, because I've got a 4-minute video which just shows some of the things that it was able to do. But most interactions were between the patient and a touch screen. So the hypothesis was that if we randomized patients to the technology at the time of discharge after an exacerbation of COPD, that as a consequence of that their exacerbations would be picked up earlier, resulting in an intervention and fewer readmissions, but also that the extra support associated with this and the telehealth study would result in lower anxiety, reduced loneliness, and improved adherence, both with their medication taking, but also with performing the home rehab program, which was developed for use with the computer. So the things that we programmed it to do and asked patients to undertake was to undertake weekly lung function testing and to measure their pulse oximetry. They also had a chronic care questionnaire, and they did that weekly, or if they were deteriorating, and if they were deteriorating, were able to contact the physiotherapists. The robot reminded them to take the medications daily by communicating with them, and the program they did was also to coach them in terms of the rehabilitation program. Had a lot of other messages as well, and it was linked with Smartinhalers to actually access their adherence, and I'll show you that a little bit in more detail. There's also a mobility app to sort of evaluate their activity and sleep, and also there was a Feel Unwell button, which meant that they could activate and contact us more quickly if needed. So the videos, I won't show the videos, but these were all on the video and just showed them how to do their oximetry. It showed them how to use their spacer for their inhaler technique, and they could just push the button, and they saw a sort of 2 or 3 minute video that went through these things, how to do their lung function. It was the exercise program. It was all on video, and in fact they could follow it at home in association with watching the video. And those videos were all developed by the physios here and were sort of downloaded subsequently onto the robot. The Smartinhaler is also developed in Auckland by Aderium, which is a company that has evolved in Auckland. It's a interesting and unique device. They're certainly at the head of the field internationally. And the device clips on the end of an inhaler and is able to monitor every time it's activated. So the activated signal goes either through the computer or back through the robot or through a smartphone and then out onto an external website. So whilst they were at home, we were able to monitor their activity, not only through the computer and the robot, but also through this external website. So there was a feasibility study, and it was a randomized one where we recruited 60 patients. I have to say there were over 300 patients that were interviewed, but we selected 60 for this particular study. They were recruited at the time of a hospital discharge. We informed the GP of that. And the criteria for their inclusion was that they had to have a diagnosis of COPD, which was predominantly smoking related. We picked a group from our previous experience which were more likely to be socially or geographically isolated. There had to be less than 90. It was more challenging for the older group who were somewhat technophobic. We tried to exclude those who were likely to die by using some criteria. And as I said, there were two groups, intervention and control. It was limited just to 4 months, mainly because of the restrictions placed on us by the HRC. But we also looked at secondary outcomes, which was number of GP and nurse visits, mainly for a health economics analysis, but we looked at information derived from the questionnaires and from their adherence information, etc. And we did a cost-benefit analysis. So the inclusion criteria, I won't go through in too much detail, other than to say we tried to get those people who were living in a more isolated setting and who had higher levels of anxiety and who were a bit more geographically remote. And we excluded those patients that we felt were, as I said, at high risk of dying and who had important other comorbidities. The control group got standard care, but we did assess their adherence because we were able to monitor their inhaler compliance by way of the Aderium product. So the main aim was to evaluate feasibility, really clinical effectiveness, and also cost effectiveness of the COPD telehealth system delivered on a robot. And the hypothesis was that it would reduce hospital bed care days compared to control group. The reason for the emphasis on bed care days was that previous telehealth studies in this group infer that if it's successful, you reduce days in hospital more than you will readmission rates. So that was the primary hypothesis. And it will also have other positive effects. So the primary outcome was readmission days in hospital, and the secondary outcomes were adherence, symptom control, functional status, levels of depression and anxiety as measured by the questionnaire, loneliness, self-efficacy, and the cost-benefit analysis. Because of the limitations of the presentation time, I'm just going to limit it to the main outcome here, but you can see that subsequently to recruitment into the study, the admissions were somewhat reduced, but it wasn't significant. The bed days more substantially reduced, and that almost reached statistical significance. So 65 days in hospital versus 38 days in the robot group. And the mean saving for the 30 patients that were recruited, and it was 56,000 over 4 months. But if you included all of the extra costs associated with a physio, Wi-Fi connection and phone, etc., that was 16,000. So the net benefit to, I guess, the intervention was a 39,000 benefit. And we've annualized that because the robot at that stage we thought would cost 3,000, actually reduced now to 2,000. But the annualizable cost for just 30 patients, even alone for the cost of the robot, was estimated to be about $24,000 for a group of 30 patients. And those are just the direct costs as defined for the hospital. You can see that the direct costs for the controls were over 2,000 versus half that cost for the robot. And even when you take into account all of the other issues, including drugs and GP visits, etc., still worked out substantially different than the cost of not having a robot. So just as a last slide, basically the London School of Economics, who actually are involved in some of the studies we're doing, as well as in the Toulouse, have done an evaluation of COPD, just reminding us that the most cost-effective interventions are to do with flu vaccination and smoking cessation, but telehealth is one of the least cost effective. So if we're going to make a difference with telehealth studies, we have to be very clever, and that's hopefully what we tried to achieve with this study. Thank you.